Welcome to the second installment of the History of MAF. As a refresher, the last video covered MAF prehistory, the friend group that eventually created MAF, the ways that MMS influenced the server's creation, and finally, the brief rivalry between Yash and I. Now that I have covered all of the background information leading up to MAF's creation, we can begin to cover MAF's history properly. And so, this video will explore chapters 2 and 3 of the series, which will cover the day MAF was created through to September of 2019. In October of 2018, MAF saw its first weeks under the sun. Nobody really knew what MAF would be in the future, a sentiment reflected by the kinds of messages sent in general at the time. The rules weren't very strict, and for the most part, the server was just Google Hangouts but on Discord. We didn't even use the announcements channel, which, at the time, was actually called Announcements and Rules, hence why the rules were there. But things would soon start to change, and through trial and error, MAF would quickly find itself adapting to its new position as a real server. This chapter will cover those factors that contributed to MAF's initial development during its first months of existence, and explore what being a member of the server during this period was like. Where this journey begins is around the end of November, about the time when my rivalry with Yash was ending. People started to join MAF, some of whom would be critical to the server's future development. Looking back at this list of people, I bet most of us can recall a couple of ways that Wase and Luke contributed to the server, and I'm not denying their importance. But at this point in the server's history, the two people who really revolutionized MAF were Mason and Yash. Let's start off with Yash. As we all know from the last video, Yash was not necessarily a new Discord user like most of MAF at the time, so he knew a little bit about how Discord worked. And so, Yash introduced something new to MAF from his server, bots. Specifically, Dank Memer, Me6, and Rhythm, two of which we still have today. With Yash's help, I was now ready to grow MAF, and after making some of our first emojis together, I was now inspired to get the wheels turning, with announcements from that point onward coming almost daily. Let's stop here for a second. Some of you might not understand why bots were so important back in the day, given how much less popular they are now. Though, I'm sure everybody can understand that things are quite different now from how they were back then. When MAF was in its infancy, everybody on the server was also just getting to know each other. A lot of people came from different teams, and some of us didn't even have any classes together, so people on the server didn't really know each other that well. There was no MAF friend group, and it wasn't as easy as it is now to just hop into a VC and start talking with whoever's in there. So there had to be something for people to do to keep them coming back to the server, and that something was Dank Memer. On top of just the Pliz meme command, Dank Memer also features a currency game, which, for those who don't know, allows users to compete with one another in obtaining the most money. Although it may seem trivial today, Dank Memer coins were a big deal in 2018 MAF. If you were an MAF member at the time, you were grinding Dank Memer coins, and Dank Memer was so important that regulations for how to use the bot were incorporated into the official server rules. To put things into perspective, Dank Memer was so popular that it was essentially another one of those games that people would play on block browsers back in middle school. In fact, many people did do that, which led to them inviting their friends to MAF for the sole purpose of trying out Dank Memer. I can clearly recall at the time that some people even thought that we had created Dank Memer, and that MAF was the only place where you could access the bot. Obviously that's not the case, we just happened to popularize the bot and spread it to tons of people throughout the school. Eventually, Dank Memer would become the inspiration for the second ever MAF event, pioneering a long and rich history of MAF events that one could say extends even to this day. Anyway, I believe I've made it clear how important Dank Memer was to the first months of MAF. However, this doesn't even mark the end of Yash's initial contributions to the server. As mentioned earlier, Yash also added Me6 and Rhythm to the server. Rhythm was a hit as soon as it was added, but it was also just a music bot, which doesn't mean it wasn't important, but it was definitely much less important than Me6, the official moderation bot of MAF that, as you know, we use to this day. The addition of Me6 goes along with another thing Yosh did, which was teaching me how to properly change the server settings. Essentially, Yosh brought me out of the Stone Age and opened the door for what I will call server theory, which is basically just all the things involved in the management and customization of the server. I saw before me infinite possibilities for what I could add to MAF that would determine its trajectory in the future, so I started making changes to bring MAF in the direction I saw fit. Another thing that I began experimenting with was server staff. As I'm sure a lot of us are aware, MAF staff roles have been a huge part of MAF's history, but the system that you remember was not actually the first of its kind to be implemented. The first server staff system ever developed was a system of trusted members. Basically, depending on how much I trusted you, I would give you a role which had certain permissions which ranged from small things like deleting messages and muting and deafening in VC, to abilities like channel management. The system didn't have elections of any sort, and to make an interesting connection could probably be most closely compared to what we have on Server 4 today. In fact, the more laid-back nature of MAF during its first months oddly resembles Server 4 in its lenience and amount of active members, which may suggest that we naturally reverted back in response to decreasing activity. Just a thought to consider. Anyway, the trusted member system ended up not working because when you make a staff role that inherently implies different levels of trust, you're gonna feel bad when you have to decide not to give it to somebody. As a result, basically everybody who was active had a staff role, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, did not work out. The MAF staff system was revised after this brief experiment, and the new system that we've all come to know began with Alex Song becoming the first moderator on MAF. Another contribution that Me6 had on the server was the introduction of the level system, which contributed significantly to the promotion of activity on MAF, in which some of us have continued to build upon to this day. So as you can see, Yosh was a huge influence to the server, and there is a lot to be attributed to him in terms of directing the server down the path that it took. I know in the last video, Yosh may have been presented in a bad light, and to be honest, I didn't even realize how influential Yosh was until I began researching for this video. But I hope that after reviewing his initial contributions to the server, we can all finally give Yosh the credit that he deserves. Anyway, the second influential member to discuss is Mason. Those of you who may be closer to Mason will know that he is a person who loves to include others. This often means inviting his friends to whatever events that you were planning that happen to also include him. And although sometimes his kind-hearted desire to include others can lead to less beneficial things, it was this part of Mason's nature as a person that really spurred MAF to the status that it came to have. A lot of the people that Mason invited would become very influential in the server's history. Here's a list of some of the people that Mason invited to the server. There's probably a lot more people, and some of these people would go on to invite even more people to the server. But I believe the message is clear about how important Mason was as an inviter. On top of all this, Mason was an incredible staff member who was active and dedicated to the server, which is probably why he was the first person to become an MAF admin. Now that we have discussed Mason and Yosh's contributions to the server, let's stop to consider some of the other developments that occurred during this time period. The first thing to consider is probably more of a lesson on how to treat your friends. I hope everybody recognized what was wrong with what I did to Yosh in order to surpass his server, because being dishonest like that can have lingering effects on people. Clearly, Yosh was affected by what I did, which can be seen by his actions during his first months on the server. During a birthday party in December of 2018 where I left my laptop out, Yosh transferred ownership of MAF to himself. The situation was eventually fixed, with Yosh being pressured into giving back ownership. But he would then later ask his friend to organize a bot raid of MAF, which for those who may have ever wondered, is the reason for all the people at the bottom of the levels ranking on the MAF Me6 leaderboard. Along with this, Yosh also threatened to hack multiple people on the server. The reason that I'm mentioning these things is because they raise the concern of safety on MAF. Safety was a big part of MAF. From the beginning, names had to be declared upon arrival, curse words were prohibited, using MAF in school was banned under the risk that the server could be discovered, and server members could not invite online friends. This ultra-safe policy came as a result of the bad things that I had heard about Discord before I came onto the platform, along with other factors such as Yasha's shenanigans. But these oversafe regulations only held the server back in the long run. Also, for those who are curious, cursing was banned because Tanush told me that he got in trouble with his parents after they saw a curse word on MAF. Another important development in MAF that occurred during this time was the emergence of questions about the server's identity and trajectory that would be relevant for the rest of MAF's existence. These questions are, to what extent should MAF cater to academics? And what comes first, the rules or the laughs? Let's start with the second question because it's a little more confusing. I'm sure we're all familiar with the irony of the server 4 rules. Some of our members break them regularly, yet the rules stay unchanged and the members stay unpunished. This is because server 4 was built around catering to the MAF friend group. MAF was not built around the friend group because there was no friend group when the server was created. Therefore, for much of MAF's history, the rules came first, and people could not post whatever they wanted. However, letting people post whatever they want, especially MAF members, makes the server an unwelcoming environment for other members for obvious reasons. This is where the dilemma is, one that I face almost every day. How do you cater to both your friends while making sure the server environment is appropriate for everyone else? This question goes back all the way to February of 2019, when the first debates over an anarchy channel appeared, an obvious solution to the issue, but an answer would not be reached until much later in MAF's history. The other question to address is much simpler. Should MAF be an academic server, and to what extent? This question first emerged in January, where data about teams was collected in order to distribute team rules. In many ways, this question is inevitable, given the academically oriented nature of many MAF members. But just like the previous question, this one would not be decisively answered until much later. There is no objective answer to these questions, and good arguments can be made on both sides for either of them. But as of right now in the timeline, an answer has not been reached, so we will save them for the future. However, it is important that we bring them up now, because they help to contextualize many of the decisions and conflicts that appear in MAF throughout its history. Now that we have covered most of the developments that occurred in MAF during the first couple months, let's continue exploring the factors that contributed to MAF's growth at the time. The first and arguably most important factor to MAF's growth throughout its history is MAF's openness to new members. Although there was a large desire to keep popular kids away from the server, for the most part, new server members were never immediately banned or rejected. Everybody was welcome to join the budding MAF community, with this era of MAF history being one of the most accepting to new members. Another important factor of MAF's initial growth is participation in server building. This includes server infrastructure, along with the server government. The system of people who help to govern a Discord server is important to any server, especially those with lots of members. However, staff roles also provide an incentive for people to be active because of elections. This effect was clear in MAF, with staff roles being the driving force for the growing activity on the server. Staff roles were also intertwined with member count goals, creating a positive feedback loop that greatly expanded the server. Another factor of server building is server suggestions, which includes things such as new roles, channels, and rules. Participation in this field was also very high during the early months of MAF, with the main selling point of it all being that most suggestions at least made it to a poll, meaning members had the possibility of creating change on the server. All of these factors created massive initial growth in MAF, and word about the server spread quickly throughout the school. In fact, MAF grew so quickly that during school I carried a flashcard with the server invite code on it due to the amount of people asking to join. Alright, let's stop for a second. As of this point in the video, we've explored the first couple of months of MAF and discussed the factors that led to its initial expansive growth. In terms of the time frame, we are in approximately February to March of 2019. So let's stop here and recap what MAF is like at the moment. If you were to visit General Channel around this time, you might expect to see members like Luke, Mason, Justin, Nate, Yash, Wase, Edward, and myself. Participation in server politics was very high, with announcements coming daily featuring updates to the rules, polls for new channels, staff promotions, and events. Members at the time were regularly pinged about new PewDiePie uploads, and it was around this time that members began to receive the birthday noob role. The kinds of memes that you would see on this server include stuff like this. Bots were all the rage at the time, and the server had multiple, such as Dank Memer, Pokecord, Taco Shack, and the Dad Bot. Lastly, one of the biggest issues about the server was the endless amount of arguments members had, with examples like Justin and Edward fighting daily. To conclude this chapter, the first few months of MAF's life were some of the most influential in its entire history, with many of the defining characteristics of the server emerging during this era. The transition into a real Discord server saw the development of an MAF that was looking for and accepting of new members, and where people actively searched for opportunities to improve the server. Luck and good timing ensured that MAF remained in its dominant position, with most competing servers quickly being made obsolete. The future looked bright, and while the server flourished online, Frai's communism brought members together in an environment outside of Discord, gradually building the foundation of the emerging MAF friend group. In the present day, MAF is a distant memory of the past. Forever frozen in its archived state, the server is like a snapshot in time, with its customs becoming more foreign as time passes. If you take a second to think about what exactly we carried over from MAF, from the staff system to its channels, bots, roles, and even things like birthday announcements, it becomes apparent that very little remains. MAF and Server 4 are incredibly different. However, there is one thing that we did carry over, something that has continued to grow and develop outside of MAF, and that exists almost independently of the server itself. That thing is MAF culture. In Chapter 3, we will explore the beginnings of MAF culture, what influenced its emergence, and what effect it had on the server, all while continuing to follow the development of other parts of MAF, like the staff team. Before we can dive into MAF culture, it is important that we recognize the difference between MAF culture and just internet culture in general. Internet culture describes cultural concepts that originated outside of MAF. However, it should be noted that parts of internet culture are often adopted into MAF culture. During the server's initial months, MAF was dominated by internet culture because there wasn't a server culture yet, or even a cohesive server community. However, as the MAF friend group began to coalesce, early elements of server culture began to emerge as well. The server's emojis, which started off as regular internet memes, slowly transitioned into being pictures of server members, with it eventually being established that emojis could only be pictures of members. In February, I created the Breckfreck YouTube channel, and Luke uploaded the first video to his Orange channel. Lastly, bots, while not being exclusive to MAF, continue to be an important part of the server. Meanwhile, back in the real world, Frai's communism created a sense of shared accomplishment and built trust between members. I'm gonna stop here and take a second to explain Frai's communism for those who may not remember it very clearly or have no idea how it worked. In order to become part of Frai's communism, members were required to donate at least 1 cup of fries to the table every week. If members met the donation requirement, they could take fries from the community cups anytime they wanted. Spare change from Frai's purchases went into the Frai's communism bank, a plastic bag that I would bring to lunch and leave in my locker. Money would be saved up in the bank until a sum deemed large enough was reached, at which point a splurge day would be planned. Of the 2 splurge days that we had, both were successful, and the largest amount of cups we ever reached in one day was 27. At the end of lunch, cups would be given to me and stored in a cup stack within my locker. Most of the cups have been thrown out, but I still do have some of these cups from 6th and 7th grade sitting in my closet. Anyway, back to the main topic. May 27th marks the day Did You Spot My Mom was first posted in the announcements channel, with this announcement marking the beginning of a period of exponential growth in MAF culture, featuring many icons of the server. Immediately following Did You Spot My Mom came Grant Clan, the first Minecraft realm, and on the 10th of June,
It's me, Baby KATA.
Baby KATA. Nothing brings people together like laughter does. and with every new inside joke, the identity of the MAF member grew stronger and more defined. There was also me just abusing the shit out of my powers and giving head admin to everybody, which most people liked. Server events also became more creative and would occur more and more frequently. All in all, one could say that there was now a sense of identity for MAF members. However, the most important part of this cultural renaissance was MAF's first Minecraft server. What you're seeing right now is footage from the first survival world of Realm 1, taken from a world download. Everything is untouched, left exactly the way it was 4 years ago. The name of this village, as some may remember, is Dark Oak Town. It was here that MAF's long tradition of Minecraft servers was first established. The realm itself is the MAF manifestation of the surge in popularity that Minecraft experienced in 2019, another example of internet trends becoming part of MAF. This inherent feature of the realm is one reason why it was so important, because it involved MAF in a trend that existed outside of the server. This meant that people who played Minecraft outside of MAF would join the server to participate in the large Minecraft community that existed there. In fact, people did join MAF just to play on this realm, with some even going as far as to purchase Minecraft. The realm, and the many servers that would come after it, would go on to have an incredibly large impact on MAF's history that can sometimes be overlooked. That's why it is important to recognize just how much the realm did for MAF in terms of attracting new members and building the community. Very few things have had an impact comparable to Minecraft's when it comes to unifying the server, and none of them will ever compare to Minecraft's longevity. Throughout the rest of the summer of 2019, VC activity far surpassed channel activity for the first time in the server's history, largely due to members being mostly active on the realm. As of this point, we've covered most of the major developments that occurred during this cultural renaissance at MAF. However, just as a final note, I would like to present an announcement that I believe will help to truly put the effects of MAF culture into perspective. Alright, now that we're done with culture, let's move on to other aspects of MAF's development. Another part of MAF that saw great change during this period was the staff team. MAF's staff team was one of the most elaborately planned aspects of the server, doubling in role as both the rule enforcement of the server and as a major promoter of server growth. This period of MAF history is a great example of the strategic significance that the staff team had, not only through the actual staff, but also as a concept. To illustrate what I mean, let's take the example of how the staff team was expanded. Ever since the failure of the trusted member system, it was imperative to me that the staff team only be expanded to a reasonable extent. Staff roles were kept limited, with new openings in higher positions being made available as certain member count milestones. In effect, staff roles maintained an element of exclusivity, adding to their allure and prestige, and thus attracting many members to shoot for positions. Another factor that added to this was the paragraph promotion system, introduced in June of 2019. The new paragraph system added to the prestige of staff roles, making the climb to the top increasingly more competitive and adding a sense of accomplishment to those who made it. The cumulative effect of how the staff team was expanded had the simple but crucial purpose of making people actually care about getting into the staff team. However, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the staff team was perfect. Even though I did just glorify the paragraph promotion system, it should definitely be noted that the system was also kind of stupid, as anybody who went through the grading knows. Obviously, it would have been much easier to skip all the nonsense and directly promote people that were qualified. I bring this up not to bash on my 6th grade self, but to illustrate the fact that MAF was not usually built in a rational or effective way, and that in reality it was quite inefficient. However, as I just explained with the example of the staff team, Some parts of MAF, despite being built inefficiently, could simultaneously have a massive effect on server growth, which goes to show that sometimes the factors that contributed to MAF's development emerged on the basis of nothing but pure luck. The staff team wasn't necessarily very peaceful either. This could have been a result of everybody just being incredibly hostile to each other during this time period, to the point where we literally had to ban arguing. But it is important to recognize this hostility because it had lasting effects on the staff team. For example, Yash, who had climbed to the rank of admin, was eventually completely removed from the staff team in one decision due to some beef that he had with Edward, Terence, and Wase, effectively ending Yash's MAF career. To be fair though, Yash kinda did deserve it at the time. Another admin-related incident that occurred was Mason's first leave. Mason is the type of person who can get very goofy at times, in a way that can be annoying to some people. My 6th grade self clearly did not appreciate Mason's humor, and I became increasingly annoyed at the way he sometimes abused his staff powers in very minor ways, definitely much less than I did. And so, when the first head admin elections came around and the choice was between Mason and Luke, the decision was a no-brainer. However, it wasn't actually this decision that caused Mason to leave, with Mason actually being a pretty good sport about it all. Sometime in the future, I snapped at Mason for doing something I probably thought was annoying, and told him why I chose Luke. My justification wasn't very good, and Mason had all the reason in the world to be annoyed at me, which clearly he was, because at that point he had had enough of my nonsense and of the staff team's nonsense in general, and left the server. Looking back at this moment and at the way I treated all of the staff members during this time period, I believe that it is only fair that I offer an apology. So I'm sorry. Chapters 2 and 3 are undoubtedly quite eventful compared to the first chapter. This is only natural because they encompass literally the entirety of 6th grade. It was during this school year that MAF established itself and showed the first hints of its exponential growth to come, setting many precedents that would stick with the server for years to come. Despite what this video's length may suggest, there's actually quite a bit of information that was not covered in this video. However, fitting the events of 11 months into one YouTube video isn't exactly realistic to begin with. All of this, however, is just the beginning of a massive period of cultural and server development that will only continue into the 2019 to 2020 school year. In the upcoming chapters, we will see the arrival of many notable additions to the server cast, while revisiting many staples of MAF history in a period widely regarded as the peak of MAF.